feel really naked. I have like no eyeshadow on, no necklace. This is weird. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing my March wrap-up. Before we get into anything bookish, however, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what was the best book you read in March. Let's talk about it in the comments down below. Yeah, so once again, weirdly enough, this month feels like it lasted a lifetime, particularly when I look back at all the books I read. The first book I read this month, it literally feels like it's been a lifetime since I read that book. And in reality, it's maybe been 3 weeks. I don't know why. What is time? As usual, before getting into all of my reviews, let's do a rundown of all of the stats for the books I read this month. I read 11 books this month, and across those I read 3,910 pages. That includes converting audiobooks to pages, but in terms of audiobooks, I read 63.8 hours via audio. That's a lot. That is a lot. I did not realize I had read so many books that way. My average rating this month was 3.7 stars, so not too bad. I did unfortunately have 1 DNF as well. In terms of my mini goals that I have for myself every month, I am gonna actually start remembering to keep track. So first, I did complete my comic. That's great. I also completed a nonfiction book. However, I did not read a big book for the month. 2 out of 3, not bad. In terms of my genre breakdown, I read 2 contemporaries, 4 fantasies, 1 graphic novel, 1 mystery, 1 nonfiction, 1 romance, and 1 short story collection. One more thing before we hop into all of my reviews. There are a good many books on this list that I have actually already reviewed in different videos, so I'll put a link to those in the cards over here. You can definitely go check them out. There are a few here and there which I also read and am not going to be reviewing just yet, but I have videos planned for those here soon. So first up is A Brush with Love by 𝗖cie Eddings, and I read that in a ARC reading vlog. Like I said, link in the cards. Next, for my feminist reading vlog, I read both 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes, as well as Difficult Women by Roxane Gay. I also read Anxious People by Frederick Bachman for a video that'll be coming out here shortly. Secret Service at Kingsman Volume 1 by Mark Miller, and that will also be coming out in a video here soon. And I think that's officially it. In terms of organization this month, I thought we would go from my lowest rated book to my highest. So for my lowest rated book of the month, unfortunately, that was a book club pick for the Found in Translation book club, and it was Strange Beasts of China by Angie. This was sold to me as a bestiary style book of cryptids from Chinese mythology with a underlying mystery going throughout. However, that's not really what this is. In the summary on Goodreads, the main character is labeled as a cryptozoologist, but after reading the book, the society knows all of these creatures exist. They have names for them. They all acknowledge who they are. Many of them have played a part in society. So technically speaking, they are not cryptids. Cryptids mean you're not sure if they exist or not, which puts the perception in my mind that these are possibly mythical beasts. Like, we don't know if they exist or not. That's not what this is. In that case, she's just like a zoologist, or I guess almost an anthropologist, since majority of the beasts that are discussed in this book are all very human-like, not cryptids. The main focus in this book throughout is actually more of just like what makes someone a human, because many of these characters throughout the stories are beasts, but inevitably we find out something about them that makes them very inherently human, and then we meet many humans who are incredibly beast-like. The layout of this was interesting, however. I guess in terms of the bestiary aspect, it did stay true to its name. Every chapter is almost more like a story revolving around whatever that kind of beast is. Every one of the stories revolves around our unnamed main character meeting or somehow coming in contact with one of these beasts, describing them to us, discovering some secret or conspiracy revolving around all of the beasts, and then eventually at the very end she will reveal whatever it was that was held back previously that made this more of a mystery, and explain more in depth what the beast is, how they came about, like how they're gonna die out, stuff along those lines. Don't expect any kind of great characters in this. I couldn't really connect with any of them, and I don't think that's just because our main character was unnamed. It just felt like they were poorly characterized. She basically went back and forth between either being completely detached or nearing hysterics. It was really weird. And the dynamics she had with the different characters who are recurring in the stories, also really strange. The biggest one was her professor when she was in school to become a zoologist. Either they were like best friends or they were literally throwing verbal grenades at each other. And it was just, I couldn't get a read on what their relationship was supposed to be like. On top of that, the tone throughout most of these stories was very melancholic, and it actually worsened the further in you got, which I just was not in the mood for that kind of a story when I read this, so I think that's another big negative for me. I kind of enjoyed this. It was pretty different. It was very unlike anything I've ever read before. But that being said, I just don't really think this was the story for me. Yeah, this was a 2.5 stars, making it my lowest rated book this month. Next up is a book that I actually mentioned in my April TBR that I might possibly get read in March, and surprise, surprise, I actually did. That was The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave. This is actually the pick for my book club with my personal book club next month, but it's also the Whiners pick for March, so I wanted to try and kind of kill two birds with one stone by getting this read. Luckily, I did. This is a mystery following a woman and her stepdaughter after the woman's husband disappears when his company is the subject of a giant scandal and revealed to be a fraud. The only communication she has with her husband after this happens is a note saying to protect her. She assumes this is referring to her stepdaughter, and then eventually her stepdaughter finds a giant duffel bag of money in her school locker, and so the two of them end up trying to investigate what is taking place and start to get to the bottom of whatever mystery is going on. This was a pretty quiet mystery following a story that slowly unravels these two women's lives, and with that, I think the strongest aspect of this story is the characters. Hannah, our MC, has a lot of depth, and she is really struggling to bond with her stepdaughter Bailey, I think her name was. But the dynamic that develops between the two of them as they are searching for Hannah's husband is probably my favorite part of this. We get to see their bond slowly strengthened as the story progresses. Even with that though, I did want more from it. I did like this mystery in the beginning. I was very invested. Hannah is not the kind of woman to just stay home and keep quiet. She is going to get to the bottom of things, and that made her very interesting to follow. However, once the answer is actually unveiled, it's kind of a shame to say, but it felt like things were really grasping at straws. I wasn't really invested anymore, and I was definitely having to suspend my disbelief because I just didn't think these things were very realistic, particularly since the rest of this book up until that point felt very grounded in realism. My biggest negative though in this was definitely the writing style. The writing style and I did not mesh. It is incredibly repetitive. This will say the exact same thing 3 different times in different words. It just felt so unnecessary. At the beginning, I took note of it, but I didn't particularly mind it. By the end of the book though, I was so tired of it and just really was hoping that the author would eventually get to the point. Because of that, the pacing this dragged a lot. It just felt very overwritten, and that's coming from somebody who enjoys flowery writing. On top of that, because of those issues, I never really felt anxious or unnerved, which is a feeling I most often associate with mystery thrillers. By the end, this didn't even have the feel of a mystery for me, which that was particularly problematic in the climax, because when our main character is going into this situation, you're very obviously supposed to be on the edge of your seat, but I just didn't feel that way. The author did not instill that emotion in me. The ending was sweet, but fairly short, and like I said, after we got the answer, I just didn't really know where this was going anymore, so like it was a quick read. I blasted through it fairly fast thanks to the audiobook, but it's like a 2.75 stars on Cawpile, so like I guess officially a 3, but I don't know how this was labeled the best mystery on Goodreads last year. So next up, starting into my 4 stars, is Bad Blood: Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup by John Carreyrou. This is a investigative journalist piece into the Theranos scandal. I picked this up on the recommendation of Dasha over at Mythic Pages, and wow, I really enjoyed this. I did not expect to finish the second half of this book in a single sitting, but I did. I blasted through it so quickly. This is a page-turning nonfiction book. Definitely set up in a way that it feels like a nonfiction thriller. I was so invested, I had to find out where the story was going to go, especially once Carreyrou himself entered the story. I knew we were getting close to the climax, and I just could not stop. Once he is introduced, it reads more and more like a first-person investigative mystery, but Prior to that, he does a fantastic job of looking at this company from many different perspectives of different individuals who were involved in this scandal and eventually learned of the giant corruption and cover-up that was taking place. When I went into this, I knew about Elizabeth Holmes and I had heard of Theranos, but I was still pretty in the dark about the entire situation. The way this is laid out time and time again, Carreyrou would just make my jaw drop on the floor, and how he would unveil them would just every time make me sit there and think, what the f? The readability of this definitely shows that Carreyrou is a very strong author, and I think it really showcases that he is a journalist because he knows how to get your attention and keep it throughout. I was a hair concerned about this getting confusing, but I think the way he lays everything out keeps it pretty simple, and even whenever big medical or sciencey terms will start to be more involved, he does a good job of explaining them in layman's terms. Like I was saying previously, before Carreyrou actually enters the story himself, he would mostly focus on each chapter being from only one or two people's perspective who were involved in the Theranos company, and that really helped to keep names straight, to keep perspective straight, to know where we learn certain information from, and I think that really helped with the layout of this as well. He would identify the two players, what role they were in the company, how they were involved in the scandal if they were. If they weren't, he would then unveil to us how they eventually had their rose-colored glasses removed and the eventual outcome they had when the company was revealed to be a giant fraud. This made the book almost read like a podcast. I also listened to the audiobook of this and I definitely recommend it. My few negatives is I just kind of wish we had seen more about Elizabeth Holmes herself. I felt like she kind of got glossed over, and I really was so intrigued by her. Like, I want to know more about this woman. I'm definitely gonna go check out the mini documentaries and series that have come out now about this situation because I want to know more about her. On top of that though, the ending of this did feel a bit sudden. Thankfully, both the audiobook and my copy of this physically had little additions that took place afterwards to kind of add on to where the story had progressed since this was originally published. Finally, I just felt since we did do that alternating between so many different people, there was some information that did get repeated a good few times. Across the board, this was really interesting, especially if you're interested in true crime, if you like thrillers, but you want to start trying out nonfiction, start here. This was really good. I gave this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Next up was actually kind of like my mood read of the month, and that was the 10th book in the Charlie Davidson series, The Curse of 10th Grave by Darynda Jones. Continuing my reread of this, if you have not heard my tiny spiel before, then this is the 10th book in the Charlie Davidson series. Charlie is a private investigator as well as the Grim Reaper, and we follow along as she goes into all of these different mysteries, as a fantastical world is built, and as she has her own little romance. It's my favorite series, and I'm so glad I've continued rereading it. This one, my biggest plus in this is I love the amount of communication that takes place between Charlie and our love interest, because there's many of the books where they are hiding things from one another, and in this one, even though they are both aware they are hiding things, they acknowledge that fact. Like, they say, I have 3 secrets. I can't tell them to you now, but I want you to be aware that I have these secrets. And I really enjoyed that. The main mystery of this one kind of feels a little out of place in comparison to where the main plot of this series is developing into and how far we have progressed in the fantasy element. It just felt like the mystery was very small potatoes in comparison. Also, this is gonna sound so weird out of context, but like, there's so much mouth to mouth in this book that is not done romantically, and it just makes me chuckle uncomfortably every time. I definitely did that at least 5 or 6 times, and was that really necessary at this point? So with that being said, this one did get dropped down to 4 stars, but still loving these characters, still love the overall series, cannot wait to continue with the 11th one. Okay, next up is one that I think technically I officially rated as like 4 stars in Copile, but this book has been in my head nonstop since I finished it. I keep looking back on it and just having so many positive memories. So I think in reality, I'm gonna bump it up to like a 4.5. Yes, there are things wrong with it, but my enjoyment outweighs those. So 4.5 stars for The Wolf and the Woodsman by Eva Reid. This story is based on Jewish folklore and Hungarian mythology. In it, we are following our main character 𝗖cie, who is the only girl in her village who does not have a power. Unfortunately, every few years, these woodsmen will come to their village to take one of the girls back to the king, and this year her village sacrifices her to the woodsman. Unfortunately for all of them, along the way back to the kingdom, 3 out of 4 end up dying, and then the last woodsman and our main character end up being reliant on one another to try and survive. They also end up revealing the political and religious discourse that is taking place across the country and the very delicate situation that they are both now in. They end up trying to work together to possibly bring a peaceful solution, but things are not that easy. I went into this knowing that base synopsis I just gave you, and honestly, I would say don't really look into anything more except for possibly content warnings, because this is kind of gory. But this book surprised me. I did not expect this to be so perfect for me, but it was. Right out of the gate, it just had such a wonderfully eerie atmosphere. It definitely was a story reminiscent of a fairy tale, and pairing those two things together, y'all know, it's my new brand. Our main characters were a delight to follow, particularly once walls come down. I really enjoyed the fact that 𝗖cie is not a particularly likable character. She's pretty prickly, she's very rude, but I can also understand why she acts that way, particularly when we learn about her history within her village. Our woodsman does take a little bit of time to get a proper feel for, much like 𝗖cie has to do with him. Once we do get to know him, I loved getting to see his tough exterior that hides his sweet insides and a cinnamon roll. Well, like kind of a cinnamon roll that's an asshole, but like that's my favorite kind of cinnamon roll. So also slow burn, enemies to lovers, forced proximity, forbidden romance. Holy shit, so many tropes that added up to a fantastic, fun to follow, banter-filled connection between these two. Oh my god, it was so good. The plot in this moves very slowly, and it definitely takes some time to get a hold onto the plot. Even though the beginning of this does have some plot, it's definitely more focused on establishing the characters, the history, the world, the different religions, and especially the politics that are taking place. But the second half of this really gets moving. I was very surprised by the number of plot twists that take place. As I also mentioned previously, this does not shy away from the gore and the brutality that is taking place, particularly in the scenario where a single religion is trying to snuff out the other 3 major religions which are present in this country. Like I said, enjoyment-wise, like this would be a 5 stars. I mean, look at all these tabs. I have so many of them. There were some negatives. Like I said, the plot pacing in this not consistent. The first half and the second half are very different. Personally, I can kind of see past that a little bit because I don't mind slow-moving stories. It's a very jarring and glaringly obvious distinction between the two, so it makes them feel very separate and not cohesive like the book should be. Also, like, the writing isn't my favorite. It's very wordy, but it's not particularly lyrical or flowery, which, I mean, like, that's such a specific complaint. I know so many people who would not complain about that. That's just my preference when a book is this verbose. But that being said, though, the writing is perfect in immersing you into this creepy atmosphere, weird and moving forest and these decrepit villages. I really had such a good time with this one. My caw pile is 4 stars, but in reality, I think it's more like 4.5. Like, I think this was a 4.5 star, if I'm being honest. Okay, and then finally is my 5 star and the best book I read this month, which was Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. So this is the prequel to The Hate You Give, which is right over there, and it is following Star from that book's father, Maverick, when he is a teenager. So this is set in the 90s, and Maverick has just found out that he is a father to his son, 7. While he is having to deal with the issues that come with taking care of a 3-month-old, he is also still in school and occasionally drug dealing to try and make ends meet. I'm so glad I picked this up. The Hate You Give was my favorite book from 2020, and one of the biggest themes throughout that is family. That definitely continued in this one here. I loved seeing more of the Carter family and seeing actually how it came to be. I adored them so much in that first book, and nothing changed with this one. This definitely hits on the family that you have by blood and then the family that you have by choice. I don't want to keep comparing them, but while The Hate You Give was definitely hitting on some very hard hard and heavy, loud topics that get a lot of attention. This one was definitely still doing that, but most of them were a lot more quiet. I just thought it was impressive that even though these issues don't get a lot of noise, Angie Thomas still gave them the attention, the respect that they deserve in this book. There definitely is not a lot of plot in this. It is seriously a character-based story. The development of Maverick throughout this was fantastic. Definitely what I expect from a coming-of-age story, particularly from one written by Angie Thomas, because wow, that woman can just create characters that are so realistic, so human, and it's so impressive. We see how the different adults in his life influenced him to become the character that we see in the first. His dad, his mom, Mr. Wyatt. I really liked getting to know each of them, and all of them stand on their own as characters outside of Maverick. But then again, like I said, you can see in Maverick how he was influenced by all of them. Maverick was just so real. Like, I had a hard time believing this was a fictitious book because it really felt like I was reading from a real person's perspective, especially in the way Thomas would use street vernacular in this story. It definitely made me feel like I was reading from the perspective of a 17-year-old boy. I thought it was so impressive in the way she would even do reveals from other characters to Maverick, where if I took a step back, for me, it wouldn't be shocking at all. But because I was reading it in Maverick's perspective and it was so surprising to him, it was then surprising to me. I fell in love with this character so much. He's caring, he's funny. He makes mistakes, but he also wants to improve so badly. He does still want to have ties to the found family he has made within the gang, but he also wants to move on from it and change. She just so perfectly puts you into this character's mindset. So yes, this was 5 stars. Fantastic. I'm glad I finally read it. I really enjoyed this. Literally have nothing but praise for Angie Thomas. So yes, a glowing 5 stars. Okay, y'all, so that is it for today. Thanks so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have all my socials linked in the description if you're interested in keeping up with what I am reading. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!